If you want to grab a Bible and turn to Acts chapter 17, we're going to be spending some of our time there in Acts chapter 17. Again, we're at that point where the Apostle Paul is now in Greece, and we followed him down the coastline. So we started in Philippi, we've moved to Thessalonica, he went to Berea, and then from Berea, he left there to go to Thessalonica, or to Athens. And so that's where we're going to start tonight, is in, for some reason, hey Tim, hit a button for me real quick, because it's not wanting to move. There we go. Thanks, sir. So Acts chapter 17. This is kind of where we left it last week. Beginning in verse 13, says, "But when the Jews of Thessalonica found out that the word of God had been proclaimed by Paul in Berea also, they came there as well, agitating and stirring up the crowds. And then immediately the brethren sent Paul out to go as far as the sea, and Silas and Timothy remained there. Now those who escorted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and received a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible. They left." Okay, so, well, it says go on one more. Let's read verse 16. "Now while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was being provoked within him as he was observing the city full of idols." Now, observing a city with a bunch of idols is not new to Paul. Every single Roman city had temples and idols. But Athens is above and beyond anything he had ever seen. And what it must have looked like in his day, we can only imagine, looking at the ruins and what all's left there. But it must have been incredible. And as the main road that ran through Athens, which I didn't get a whole lot, then there's not a whole lot of archaeological finds along that road. A lot of it because it's covered up by modern city. But the way it's described in ancient times of having just being lined, the road completely lined for miles going out of Athens, of just temple after temple after temple after temple, all of these Roman gods, and so all leading up to the Acropolis. And we've talked about the Acropolis in several cities. It's acro, meaning high place, and polis, being city. So is the city up in a high, part of the city that's up on a high place, and that most of the major cities had this. And so Athens was one that had one of the most famous, and so it was all leading to that part of the city that I'm primarily going to show you here tonight. So as Paul walks in, there are temple after temple all over this area. The first place we stopped, the morning we got up, we got to Athens late the night before, got up early the next morning. First place we stopped was at the Colosseum there in Athens. This was the original Olympic Colosseum, originally built in 335 BC, and then it has obviously been redone many, many, many times over the years, but it is still used today. And even when we were there were people from the city. It's a public place, and there were people from Athens who were out running around the track and running up and down steps, and so it was kind of a cool thing. It's shaped in the Roman fashion of a track, and it's a lot longer than what we have today, and narrower. But this is what you see anytime you see any of these athletic complexes from ancient times. If you've seen the movie Ben-Hur, where they have the chariot races around the track, it's this size of a track. That was in, and even what the movie is showing is in Constantinople, or what is now Istanbul, Turkey. And that'll probably be the last thing that I show you is Istanbul, and just some of that's going to be more of a sightseeing type of a thing instead of being connected with a lot of biblical things. But there were a lot of really interesting things there as well. So this was the first place we stopped in Athens. We're looking to the west. That is actually due west. And so you get down to the area around the Acropolis. This is a reconstruction or a drawing of what they believe it probably was like. What does it say? Circa 150 AD. So up here is the Acropolis. So I've kind of cut it off. This picture I took, this is a sign that they had for tourists as you walk in to try to get your bearings of what's what. And I didn't take a very good picture of it. But the Acropolis is back up here. And then this area here, this is the Agora. And we've talked about the Agora in a lot of these cities. That central town center, the city square. There were temples, there were public buildings, there are all kinds of things. And so what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to highlight on here one of the locations and then show you some pictures of what I took of those locations. The first place is this here. It's this stoa. It's a portico is what a lot of times the Bible would refer to it as. But it was an open air type of a building. This has obviously been restored back to what they believed it would have looked like in its original state. And it is immaculate. It's probably very, very close to what it would have been like 2,000 years ago. This now is being used as a museum, and they have a lot of different displays in museum artifacts and things in here. And as much as I wanted to just go look at all this stuff in the museum, I know there's a lot of people that they have a hard time going through museums anyway, and just seeing pictures of a museum, probably even worse. So I threw in just a few, just to kind of get an idea of, there are really not very many, some that I thought were, this is kind of interesting. How about that? It's an ancient training toilet. Put your kid in that, and I'm not sure exactly how easy that was to clean out, but they were doing it thousands of years ago, teaching their kids how to use a toilet. So this was kind of cool. This is called a claritarian. What this was used for was to select juries for trials. And so we're talking about a practice that's thousands of years old that we still do today. Well, what they would do, there are these lead pieces here, and they would have names of people. So if you were either chosen or even volunteered to go be on a jury for some trial, then you bring your little lead piece with your name on it, and they would put it in a big basket or bowl of some kind, and they would randomly be pulled out, and they would be put in these rows that going across, and until they ran out or they filled this up. Then they would roll dice. They had a tube that they would roll. It had black and white dice in it, and they were mixed up, and they would release one die, and if it rolled out of the tube, if it was a white tube or if it was a white die, then the first row of names were the ones that were selected for that jury. If it was a black die, then they would go to the second row. If they got another black die, it'd go to the third row. And then if they got a white die, the fourth row, that would be the row of the names that would be selected for that jury. So it was a random process and two different random ways of selecting names. And so I just thought that was kind of cool to see in ancient times how they were doing those things too. And just some of the architecture, that's obviously a Corinthian column. When you get that ornate, it's Corinthian, or it's called Corinthian anyway. And but this would have been, you can see it kind of in comparison with the guy standing behind it, how massive that was. That column is probably 2.5 to 3 feet in diameter. So that column would have been huge. And wherever this was, there were probably dozens of these that lined the way in the agora area. Gods, statues of gods, statues of all kinds of things. This is an idea of kind of what Paul is seeing. As he's walking around, he walks into the town center, and as he looks around, he's seeing these statues of all these different things, these gods and everything that is all around him. So I have highlighted there, this is another temple. I don't remember the name of it. That's right here. Just a couple of pictures of it as well. It has been very well restored. And so you can kind of get an idea of just how incredible something like that is. But again, another temple to another god. So let's read a couple more verses here. Acts 17, beginning verse 17. So he was reasoning in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles, and in the marketplace every day, and with those who happened to be present. And also some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers were conversing with him. And some were saying, "What would this idle babbler wish to say?" And others, "He seems to be a proclaimer of strange deities, because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection." Okay, so as Paul came into Athens, first thing he does what he always does. He finds a synagogue. And he meets with Jews, and he begins to preach the truth about Jesus. The Messiah has come, and so he's doing his best to give the Jews an opportunity to respond to Jesus. But then it also says that he went to the marketplace, and the marketplace, that's what we're talking about in the agora. Around the outside of this would have been all the shops and things around the area of the agora. This area up here was probably all shops inside those porticos, very similar to what this one looked like over here. And so this entire area of the agora, this is a picture that I took. I'm up on the Acropolis looking down. That's the temple that we just looked at a second ago. And so you can kind of see there's not a lot when it comes to the ruins of everything else that was once there in Athens in this agora. But the footprint of a lot of buildings are still there, so that they are able to kind of reconstruct and figure out what was what. Yeah. There's, as far as the worship of those kinds of gods things, that's not a thing anymore. It really, during the time of Constantine, when Christianity took over most of the temples. Many of the temples became church buildings, and that paganism pretty much went by the wayside. And so, and today, the only reason you see a lot of things with the gods is because of tourists, and it sells trinkets and things like that. I guess kind of similar to Demetrius and the silversmith, and people coming to Athens now. When I was in Ephesus, I bought a statue of Artemis. So they still are doing it, but not for worship. It's all tourism now. So that's the Acropolis. Here gives you a little bit better of a perspective of the agora. So this is the agora. That big portico building that's now a museum is sitting right over here. That temple is sitting right over here. And so this gives you a little bit better perspective of how it all lays out with the Acropolis up here. There's the Acropolis from, yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think in some cases you're right. A lot of times I know they're done as educational just to teach what the culture was like and that kind of thing, but it can definitely take a step too far. And so yeah, there are a lot of those things there, and the Norse gods, those things, those are actually coming back, but not in that part of the world, in our part of the world. Here in the United States, there's a lot of focus. There's been a lot of interest in Vikings and the Norse gods, and I've been reading some of. I mean, there are groups of people that will, are beginning to, I guess you'd say, turn and worship, call to Odin, things like that. The Marvel movies, things like that, haven't helped that, because they all play into that. But it is what's for entertainment and for fun. Some people will grab a hold of that, and because they don't understand the truth about God, and so kind of very similar to what the Apostle Paul was dealing with in Athens. They didn't really understand the one true God, and when Paul shows up, he's trying to help them understand all that. So that, as I said, that is the Acropolis from. I found a aerial view. And there's a couple of things you can see here as well. We're going to look at them closer. This is called an Odeum down here. It's like a smaller theater. There was a bigger theater over here that we'll take a little bit closer look at that's not as well preserved. This is the Parthenon. And then just various temples to various other gods, all on the Acropolis. That's what that was at one time. So here is a kind of a map of it all. Again, I'm going to try to kind of highlight the different parts of it so you can see when I'm showing you pictures where we're talking about. So here's the Odeum again. Here's the bigger theater, the Parthenon. This is an old temple to Athena. We're in Athens. It's the city of Athena. And that's why she has a prominent temple on top of the Acropolis. As a matter of fact, she had another one that was built later that's right up here. The Parthenon was originally primarily a temple to the emperor. And so it wasn't to, I guess, to them it was in a way to a god because they believed the emperors were gods. But it was originally built for the Emperor Augustus. And so I highlight, see a small little spot right there. So you can just kind of see these next pictures where we're at in all of this. So we're on our way walking up to the Acropolis and taking a picture of that part there. When we get up there on top, now I'm on top of the Acropolis looking at that corner. And just the massive construction, and we've seen it everywhere else. We've seen it in all these other cities that we've looked at, but it just never failed to blow my mind as to what it took for them. I mean, these stones, these things weigh tons. How'd they do that? Up on top of this Acropolis, and it's incredible. And you can see the roof line. This would have been a roof line that would have come up, and it would have been very ornate and decorated originally. So this is then the area as you're coming up, kind of the gate up into the Acropolis. And so this is what you kind of walk through as we're coming up. walking up closer to it. I think I put a video in here as I was walking up, kind of be able to see. Just the size and the scope of it all, and to think that there's probably less than 5% of it that's still there from what it originally was. You know, it's. Then you have the Temple of Athena. This is one of my favorites. It's one of the most beautiful. Instead of just regular columns, the columns were, I'm not going to remember what they were referred to as. These, maybe they were referred to as nymphs. But these women that had some kind of a holy religious purpose when it came to the worship of Athena. And then you have the Parthenon itself. So the Parthenon, again, is massive, is incredible. And these pictures don't do it any justice. But if you want to go, how many of you have been to Nashville's Parthenon? I haven't. I am going to now. I didn't even know it was there. But if you go to Nashville, they have built a scale replica of the Parthenon. And if you notice, the top of all of this has all been destroyed, obviously. A lot of these pieces are in a museum that's over close to, it's the Acropolis Museum, and they have tried to kind of fit those pieces together best they can in the museum. But they say that for the museum in Athens, this is all those pieces that they have found, but they say in Nashville, they actually got molds from the actual pieces in Athens to reduplicate the ones here in Nashville. And so now this, from what I understand, it's just a museum. It's an art museum in Nashville. Yeah, I'll be, my next time through Nashville, I'll definitely be checking that out. Then you have that Odeon, that smaller, I say smaller, it's pretty good size, theater that was there. As a matter of fact, they still use this, still today. I found a picture online of an orchestra concert that was taking place there, and reading some of those that were performing there. We're talking about one of the best acoustical places they've ever played, and so to think that the ancients, they had it figured out better than we do. But quite an amazing place. The other theater, this is one that would have been probably connected a lot more to the temple worship. Would have been connected, they probably would have portrayed plays about the gods and things like that. And this is, I'm up on top of the Acropolis taking this picture, looking down at that theater. This is then down at the bottom of it, looking back up. And one of the reasons that even I, and doesn't take a whole lot to assume that this was used for a lot of religious purposes, are these seats. And this is the first time I saw in any of the theaters any seats that had backs on them. The first row, these would have been elite people. I zoomed in a little bit closer, and you can see the inscriptions of names that are on here. But what's interesting, Iota Epsilon Rho, Epsilon Omega Sigma, Iereos, Ieron is temple, Ieros is a priest. And if you notice, It says it right there again. It says it right there again. These were all the seats of priests, and it has their names. This one is Demetros, which would have been the same as Demetrius. So priest Demetros, Chi is the word and then another name underneath that. And so it's kind of neat. That was kind of one of the challenges that I had going over as well. You see all these Greek inscriptions, and I couldn't read hardly any. And then you find one like this, you're like, hey, I kind of know some of these words. But it was just interesting to see just the use of these, that some kind of, most likely priests that were involved with worship to Athena in some kind of official way, that all of these seats belong to. And one of them, we know his name was Demetrius. All right, let's read a little bit more here. Acts 17, verse 19. It says, and they took him, and they brought him to the Areopagus, saying, may we know what this new teaching is which you are proclaiming. For you are bringing some strange things to our ears, so we want to know what these things mean. Now all the Athenians and the strangers visiting there used to spend their time in nothing other than telling or hearing something new. And so the Areopagus is, I marked it on the map over here just to show location. So it's up in that corner, off of the Acropolis. This is a picture. I'm standing on the Acropolis right at that entrance as we're getting ready to walk in, and that is the Areopagus, that rock. That is Mars Hill. And so this is where most likely it traditionally believed that the philosophers, they would gather around this hill on top of this mound, this rock, and they would just debate, and they would hear each other and hear all kinds of different philosophies and ideas. And well, Paul came to Athens with something they'd never heard before. Paul came to Athens teaching about this guy named Jesus and about him being raised from the dead, and they never heard this before. And so Paul's doing that down in the marketplace, down in the agora. That's where he would have been talking to people and letting the Roman people know all these things. Well, the Stoics and the Epicurean philosophers, they hear him. Hey, I never heard this before. They grabbed a hold of him, and they brought him to the Areopagus. And so this was that location there. These are the steps I was telling you about. They were roped off to where we weren't allowed to walk up them. And after looking at them, I'm glad we didn't try to walk up them. They are steep and slick, but those are dated pre-first century. So when the Apostle Paul walked up to the Areopagus, he almost certainly walked up those steps to get there. And so it's kind of one of those other very cool moments when you're just like, without a doubt, you know you're within inches of a location where the Apostle Paul would have been. Verse 22 goes on to say, so Paul stood in the midst of the Areopagus and said, men of Athens, I observe that you are very religious in all aspects. I wonder where he got that. All those temples of all those gods that were all around him. For while I was passing through and examining the objects of your worship, I also found an altar to an unknown God. Therefore, what you worship in ignorance, this I proclaim to you. So here they had this temple. It's that God that, just in case we missed one, and I believe this is also connected to the Logos. The Logos was a God that the Romans and the Greeks believed in, that was just kind of the big God over everything, but we can't really explain him. We can't see, we have never seen him. It's not like Apollo and Zeus and all that they have statues and images and things of. This is something, we know it's out there, but we can't really describe it. So that's what Paul's doing. I noticed that temple to the unknown God. Let me tell you about him. And so that's what Paul's going to do through the rest of this chapter. He goes on, I'm not going to read the whole thing. He says, "And God who made the world and all the things in it, since he is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all people life and breath and all things. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and boundaries of their habitations." He's going to go on talking about this God. And what he's doing is he's blowing their minds because they've never heard any God described like this. They have all of their individual gods that do various things. But the God that created everything, the God that's in control of all the nations, the God that, everything that he's describing, they've never heard anything like this before. And verse 30, "Therefore, having overlooked the times of ignorance, God is now declaring to men that all people everywhere should repent, because he has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness through a man whom he has appointed, having furnished proof to all men by raising him from the dead." Now, well, hold on, before we go any further. So there's Paul's message. God has appointed one man to save everyone, even you here in Athens. And he has raised this one from the dead. They had never heard of the idea of man being raised from the dead. And so something completely different. So this is on top of Mars Hill, the Areopagus. We did stop there, had a devotional on Mars Hill. Very, very chills down your spine moment. This is standing on Mars Hill looking up toward the Acropolis. All right, verse 32. Where's that? "Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some began to sneer, but others said, 'We shall hear you again concerning this.' So Paul went out of their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them." This man, Dionysius, I think that might be the last thing I had. Yep. We don't know a lot about him, but we do know some about him. Even historically, we know a little bit about him. A lot of it's tradition, but he was born in Rome, and his entire life, he had questions about life, about religions, he questioned the Roman worship to all these gods. Something just doesn't seem right to him. So he decides to go to Alexandria, Egypt, and he studied in Alexandria, Egypt. And it was while he was in Alexandria was the time when Christ was crucified. So that's the timeline of the life of this man, Dionysius. And so as he is studying and trying to answer all these questions, and he's trying to figure these things out, then he comes back to Athens, because this is where all the philosophers come. This is where all the ideas are. He's trying to find answers. And so he comes back to Athens. He actually becomes a very prominent man in Athens. And so the fact that it calls him the Areopagite tells us of his status. He would have been one of these, not just somebody who shows up at the Areopagus, but he was one of the guys in charge of the things that went on at the Areopagus. And so he was an important guy. And then all of a sudden, he hears this news of this Jewish teacher who's come into town. And he's speaking about things that he's never heard before. And so Dionysius the Areopagite becomes a Christian. And ultimately, this Greek philosopher found the answers to these questions that he'd been asking for a long time, and he found them in Christ. And tradition tells us that Dionysius, he would later become an elder or a bishop in the church in Athens. And then ultimately he will be beheaded by the Emperor Domitian in 96 AD. And so there is, again, some of it's traditional history, but there is some history behind Dionysius, the man that is mentioned here in Acts chapter 17. But along with all of that, just thinking that this is where he was. This is where he did his work. This is what he was in charge of. And was what took place in this place. He would have been one of those philosophers that heard Paul and brought him, I want to hear more. And when he heard the message of Jesus Christ, he believed. We're going to look at next week, we're going to look at Corinth. And in Corinth, there was another individual that we're going to look at. It wasn't just poor people that were accepting Christ. There were a lot of prominent, important people that were also hearing the message and believing. And we see that take place in Corinth as well. And so we will look at Corinth next week.